We get to talk to Richard Leahy again. Very, very exciting new project that he has brought to us as his gift called Beyond Jefferson's Vines, The Evolution of Quality Wine in Virginia by Richard G. Leahy, forward by Dave McIntyre. And let me give you some background on Richard here. Even though we've talked to Richard, it's been a couple years since we've done so. Probably, anyway, so, okay. Richard had the pleasure of attending the College of William and Mary and the University of Virginia to earn his bachelor's and master's degree in history. He began writing a regular wine column in the mid-'80s in the Connection newspaper group in suburban Virginia. Now, this is big kudos, big kudos. This is like flap your arms sort of big kudos. He was Mid-Atlantic and South editor for the Oxford Companion to the Wines of North America from 1999 until 2010. And he was East Coast editor for Vineyard and Winery Management for a long, long time. He is a member of the Society of Wine Educators and the Circle of Wine Writers, and coordinates the seminar programs for Eastern Winery Expositions. He's judged for eons in wine competitions, and he lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, within sight of Monticello, and is laying down a cellar of fine, fine, fine Virginia wines. And Virginia is absolutely hot to trot. And Richard, let me start by asking you emailed me that a week ago, you were in London and you were working with Oz Clarke, who I have yet to interview. And what people were getting involved with was a Virginia wine master class. Talk to us about that.
That's right, Lynn. Now, just to clarify, I wasn't there myself, but what happened was that there's a gentleman named Christopher Parker who I think you may have interviewed or know about. He is a British expat living in Virginia, and he came up with the idea of exporting Virginia wines to the UK.
Oh.
And he's been doing that now for a couple of years. And just some background on the British connection. I do have a chapter in my book about that. And the Circle of Wine Writers includes Oz Clarke, who wrote the Encyclopedia of New World Classics. Mm-hmm. So he just focused on the New World, the West Coast, Southern Hemisphere, and so forth. But that was written, I think, in the mid-'90s. So that group, the Circle of Wine Writers, in 2010 decided to do their annual trip to Virginia, their annual wine region visit. And so I helped organize that with Chris and Annette Boyd of the Virginia Wine Marketing Office. And it was a huge success. They loved the wines, but they also loved Virginia wine country and the cultural and historical connections to the mother country. And so as a result of that, there's been people at the top who are, telling other people in the trade, hey, Virginia is a hot region. Yeah. And so, getting back to last week, Virginia wines were being served at the London International Wine Fair in May, and they had their own booth for the first time.
Okay.
Secretary Haymore, Secretary of Agriculture for Virginia, was there, and many of the Circle of Wine Writers people came by. I was told that my book was there, too, but Oz Clarke asked for a copy of my book. They sent one to him, and so he wanted to do a master class of Virginia wines at the Whole Foods Market in Kensington, London.
Whoa!
So he did, and he was able to get up to speed by reading the book, and he was actually not on that original visit in 2010, but they did this. The book was sold at the Whole Foods Market in addition to Virginia wines being there, and also, I understand, being available by the glass.
Wow.
So the cool thing is that, for reasons I explain in my book, Virginia wine is trendy now in Britain, partly because we are halfway stylistically between Europe and the West Coast. We have, for example, the Bordeaux Reds. We have a warm climate, but it's not as hot as the West Coast. Of course, as you know, we have these wild vintage variations on the East Coast, which are problematic, but that's also the case in Bordeaux. But the British like the fact that we're doing more classic-style wines here in Virginia and in the East in general, where you have lower, more moderate alcohol levels, more fresh fruit flavors, and higher acidity, which means it's more food-friendly.
Yes.
So that's it in a nutshell. It's pretty exciting to be, involved in getting the word out. And I have to say, a lot of credit for this whole idea goes to Patrick Duffler of Williamsburg Winery, who is a European himself. And in 2007, he suggested something called the Virginia Wine Experience in London. I was executive director, and there were 64 wines that had been pre-vetted in a blind tasting supervised by Bruce Auckland, and we then went over to Vinopolis, which is this big winorama that they have in London, and it was a trade tasting, so that got the word out, and Andrew Jefford... Yeah, he wrote a column about it in the Financial Times of London September 1st of 2007. So that started this awareness of Virginia wine in British circles. And Patrick's thought was that Virginia would become more accepted as a classic wine region with the British than it would be in New York, because New Yorkers are so trendy that, like the French, they know everything without having learned anything.
Yes.
And so I think that's changing, but very slowly. And the challenge, in New York City, New York wines have had to struggle there because it's kind of like a prophet is accepted everywhere except in his own town kind of thing.
Right.
So he thought that we should go to the British because they are have a reputation of writing and commenting and cultivating the wine industry for centuries. And his instincts have really been borne out by how Virginia wine's been received in London.
Wow. What is Patrick's last name again?
Duffler. Duffler.
I've never interviewed him before. I'd actually like to interview Christopher Parker also.
Great idea. And there's two Patrick Dufflers in Williamsburg Winery. There's the senior, and then there's his son. Patrick, and you could have maybe both of them on, but Patrick Senior is very eloquent and articulate. Makes a really good case for Virginia wine.
Okay, wow. I've only been to a couple Society of Wine Educator conferences, but the very first conference I went to, the very first year I joined Society of Wine Educators, I want to say it was 1985. It was in Virginia, and we were tasting Virginia wines. It was all this, everybody was all excited about Virginia, and it's still been slow moving, but it seems like there's an explosion of acceptance and, as you say, trendiness about it now.
Yes, and the book covers the whole history and the subject matter of Virginia wine, but I took care to not write too much because I think focus is an important thing, and so the book focuses on the last decade, really, and really tells the story of how we have made the transition from experimental to really making world-class wines, and so you're right. I think there's, and we've gone. I basically talk about the 5 different phases of Virginia wine, and the first couple were in the 17th and 18th centuries up through the 19th century, pre-Prohibition, and then I look at the industry now as going through 3 phases. The first one was the 60s and 70s, sort of starting after Prohibition and being mostly focused on French hybrids, and then in the 80s we made a switch to vinifera that became understood as being possible and sustainable and making high wine quality. And then in the 90s, Dennis Horton had a huge influence with, on the one hand, reintroducing Norton, the native Virginia grape, or native Virginia accidental hybrid, and then showing that we had the best of a Viognier in the country. And making a huge, if you can do something like that and nobody else can quite do it, it's kind of like what Oregon did with Pinot Noir. So he really put Virginia on the map in terms of, hot new wine region. And at the same time, that was in the 90s. And then I'd say the late 90s, mid to late 90s, Bruce Auckland and I agree that by that time, Virginia vintners had finally figured out how to make reds that were not as hard and tannic and green as
I was
they had
say
been
green.
before.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so there was this transition. And then in the last phase, well, I guess that the fourth phase would be looking at the first decade of this century, with the introduction of things like Traminette, Petit Manseng, and Petit Verdot.
Mm-hmm.
And the current phase is just getting all those things together and then taking it to a level where we're getting international acclaim.
Exactly. You're bringing it to the world.
Yeah. Most of the book focuses on is a travelogue. So
okay.
I give people some historical background. I also have a chapter on viticulture to explain to people who don't understand it why it was that our 400-year history of winemaking was so, intermittent, and why it still remains a challenge, like with last year. But there are other chapters. Most of the book, as I say, is a travelogue. So I start on the Eastern Shore, and I take a route, and I go across the state from east to west and a bit from north to south. And so people could take the book with them. It's it's a little bit smaller than 8.5 by 11, so it's handy to be able to have in the car.
Yes.
The wine marketing office kindly gave us permission to reproduce their
map.
Their map in there.
I love the map.
Great.
Richard, we're going to go to a short break here, okay?
Okay, Lynn.
When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Richard G. Leahy, who is the author of this fantastic new book called Jefferson, Beyond Jefferson's Vines, The Evolution of Quality Wine in Virginia. You're listening to Wine and Dine. I thank you, and we will be right back.